I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook baby.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the 38th episode of the Reckless Musecast. We've got a special guest, Kay Clarity.
Hello.
Kay, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you are kind of a Renaissance woman because you're a singer, songwriter, writer, globetrotter. Since you've been all over the place, and one of the things I wanted to talk to you, and I think because I live in Los Angeles as well, I wanted to talk to you about. So you're a conservative, and you're also an artist. So I'm curious about what it's like living and working in LA, which is a very woke, politically homogenous homogenous place. So I'm curious about what it's been like for you. What are the pros and cons of it?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, you asking that makes me curious about your experience, but
Yeah, we can compare and contrast for sure. But
yeah, so I've been out here for about 4 years, and I guess the context for me, from what I've gathered, is remarkably different from most people's experience. I don't know how long you've been in LA, but
2 years.
Okay, yeah. So actually, right on the dot for the point I want to make. So a lot of people that I've talked to say it takes 2 years just to feel it all kind of oriented in the city, to feel like you have some real friends that you can count on,
Right.
to feel like you're situated and kind of at home. And that was so far from my experience because I found people right away. And a lot of that's because I'm Catholic and I hung out at the parish and I knew a lot of people that way. And so I have friends all over the city that are people of principle, and they're kind and they're good-hearted and they're great artists too. Some of the best, many of them working in entertainment in a really serious way, like in a very successful way. So it's just funny to me because I've had other people ask me this question, but I don't know that I've ever had to actually navigate real LA, maybe in the way that a lot of people think of it. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's kind of been my experience, and Ben has visited LA last fall. So I mean,
I'll never do it again.
So I moved.
LA was cool.
Yeah, it's fun, but you got to experience a taste of
Kay can hang out with all the Catholics who live behind you, Joe, and worship very early in the morning.
Oh yeah.
I'm assuming they're Catholic.
Catholics?
Well, they're Mexican, so I'm assuming they're
there's-
Catholics. But
yeah.
so is Joe. So
Yeah.
Joe lets me say that. I'm assuming they're Mexican. They're Latinx, as I condescendingly say on the show.
Yeah, no, there's a big church across the street, and every Sunday morning it's just like because they do these concerts every Sunday morning outside, so it's just
they're they're probably evangelicals actually if they're that loud. I'm Catholic too, Kay. When it's convenient. So
So if you move to LA, then you're gonna pull that card out.
I won't ever.
But so I moved to LA about 2 years ago, and luckily I had a couple of friends and acquaintances already here, so I was able to kind of like they'd been living in LA for a couple of years, so they were able to kind of show me around, like, oh, this place is worth going, don't go there, blah blah.
Right.
And also because my friends were already kind of creative people, so they're nobody's like I don't know any A-listers, but at least they're kind of trying to get into the entertainment industry, so they're kind of guiding me through that. It has been a little weird being as politically all over the place as I am, but also being very critical of a lot of this woke stuff. It's been a little weird when I first meet someone who's a creative person. So at first we bond over, you're into music, you're a musician, you're a filmmaker, you're a writer, whatever. But I always have to kind of test the waters a little bit because obviously I'm not going to come right out and say diversity and inclusion is stupid and blah blah blah, but at least just kind of be like, so what's been your experience like? And most of the time I've been lucky that I've been able to meet some creative people, even if they're very progressive. they've been kind of saying like, yeah, a lot of this diversity and inclusion stuff is going a little too far, and I like equality, but I think I think we're pretty much there. I don't know why we need to constantly push it all the time. So I'm glad that I've managed to meet some creative people who are sort of waking up to a lot of this stuff, but yeah, that's been kind of my experience. It is frustrating. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ben.
But Joe, I think here you're from the Bay Area, which is probably the only place worse than Los Angeles. But Kay is from Saskatchewan.
Yeah, good job.
Are there two more different places in North America than Los Angeles and Saskatchewan? And so I want to hear about that dichotomy. I will say you guys do have the best Canadian football team mascot. The Rough Riders are very cool.
You know what? I'm going to go on a tangent right now about our football.
Go for it.
Everybody always asks me a lot of questions about Canadian sports and things, and that's totally not my lane at all. But I do have very fond memories of going to the grocery store on Sundays and in the summer and there being no watermelon. And then realizing it's because they had all been bought and turned into helmets.
Oh.
For our football team. So people go really hard in Saskatchewan for the things that are ours. So there's a lot about it that's really, really, really sweet, and I miss a lot. But I also don't miss what I started calling the uninhabitable cold. So there's also that. The difference between there and here, I guess it's funny because maybe the main thing I would go to rather than even the cultural differences or sort of the value spread or whatever is that LA is such a creative home for me in a way that has been so striking. And there's a lot of that at home too, but it just takes a very different mode, and coming to a place where everyone is either a creative person or an entrepreneur or knows somebody who is, that's dear to them, just changes the game. It's just made things so much easier for me to function as a creative person and as an entrepreneur out here. I just find people understand it. Whereas at home, I think I don't want to say it's not a creative place because that's not accurate at all. And there's a lot I would want to qualify, but it's that maybe because of the history there, which was largely rural until relatively recently, it was about surviving and about community. Mm-hmm. 4 generations ago, we're talking sod houses, right? In minus 40 degree weather. Right. So it's just such a different mode of being. So I definitely feel that difference. And then obviously getting into more of the sort of ideological stuff, I guess a place like that does tend to be more conservative. And when I use that word, I don't really mean it in a strict political sense, even in my Twitter bio. Like I always debate if I should just delete it because I know people don't understand what that means. But just in the sense of being family oriented and security and community oriented, and it's going to be less like innovative and risky, and that's sometimes good and sometimes not good, right? There's always a trade-off. So it's interesting because from a personality perspective, maybe I have more of an affinity with the people that tend to be more progressive, but from the things that I deeply care about, I find myself more of the conservative bent. And so that's always been a point of tension for me. So it's interesting to come to LA and find people that actually do share so many of the things I most deeply care about, but are also these creative geniuses, really. I mean, the people I've gotten to know here are phenomenally gifted. And so being around that all the time has been an absolute joy for me. So I love LA. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. People, I know, and I totally, Ben and I, we always joke about that.
I'm just kidding. I've been to LA once last November. I liked it more than I thought I would. Joe showed me a really good time. I've always had a fascination with Southern California and places like Hawaii, but I just loved anywhere that I could go to the beach year round. Southern California especially, I kind of on this whole, that's a big part of one episode we did where I think Southern California plays a certain role in the American imagination, like New York City does for some people. And there's not too many of those. That being said, as much as I liked it, I would never live there because of the traffic. I said they could hand out money on the side of the road and I could not deal with that traffic. So, but it was really cool. I think I like the Venice Beach area, which I think was cleaned up a lot more. when I was there, and the Venice canals, and where Joe lives is really cool too. It seemed like a very neighborhood feel.
Yeah.
And Malibu was sweet, but
Yeah.
it's Malibu.
So one thing about the conservative topic, I'm curious about how conservative values play a role in your creative process. Less policy and more like just like values, and if those impact your creative process at all.
I mean, that's a great question, because one, I decided to start being frank about that, being in the most general way possible, referring to what I cared about, because I wanted that, and that's the main reason for it still. It's the reason I leave it there, is because I know it's a bad word in certain circles. And that's kind of what I wanted. I just wanted to start out the gate saying, I'm not like what I'm supposed to be. And I'd rather start there, and then I can qualify backwards. But in terms of the way it affects my art, that's another just interesting point for why I felt like I had to be clear about that's who I was, because the things I care about necessarily leak into what I write. That's a very different thing than saying, and I never would recommend this, is purposely making your songs about your value system. That's a very different thing. Sure. It's something that should be, someone I really respect said this at some point, it should be something that is undergirding what you're doing. It's assumed rather than placed into your art, right? And I think all artists have philosophical presuppositions. Like the idea of neutrality is bogus. It's not real. Everybody functions from a place of assumptions, and mine are of a certain kind, both with my faith and with, like I said, less so necessarily political leanings, although I don't shy away from that either. But but just in terms of the way I view what it is to be a human person and what matters most and these kinds of questions, like just really philosophically. Like I'm a big Roger Scruton fan, right? If you guys are familiar.
Yeah.
And I could name a lot of others. So for me, again, one of the reasons I decided to just be really clear about that being who I was that I knew the dangers of communism. I knew people who had been through it. I lived in Europe. I listened to stories of people coming out of Eastern Europe. Not that, and it wasn't that long ago. That I was there about 10 years ago, and many of them had been in their teen years when the Iron Curtain had fallen. I mean, they had been hungry, and they had to sneak around to practice their faith, and they had been afraid of what might happen to their family. And I met a guy on a plane who said that they came from Poland, they came knocking in the middle of the night and never saw his dad again. When you hear these stories, you write about them as an artist. I don't care about the label. I mean, I think the label matters in terms of engaging a really demented culture that doesn't understand what it's signing up for.
Right.
But as an artist, I'm just telling the story. But I knew that in telling the story, I would be branding myself. And I didn't want to be limited. So I just thought, well, I'll just say this is who I am because people are going to write me off anyway. So yeah, I wrote like a really expansive set of songs. That's often what I end up doing. My brain is sort of captured by something. My brain and heart get captured by something specific for a while. And I just write and write and write songs about that thing. So for a long time, I wrote a lot of songs about the devastation of communism.
Right.
So yeah, so in that sense, it leaks in, but I think it's really important not to fit your art into an ideology. It's just that you for me, it's about seeking the truth always. And then out of the heart, the mouth speaks, kind of, you put good stuff in there, you put truth, you let yourself be formed by beauty and goodness and reality, and you try to become the best person you can be and have good relationships. And out of all of that, including practicing your craft at an excellent level, out of all of that, you have to sort of trust what's coming out and trust also that you're going to keep maybe improving on that as you go. But I don't advise anybody to just purposely try to put their ideology to a song,
Right. And I really appreciated your description there, because I think that especially in this highly polarized culture, that when people would hear someone like, oh, like they're a conservative musician or conservative songwriter, like the assumption is automatically, oh, they must sing about guns, God, and freedom, sort of thing, right? And it's like, so I'm glad that you were able to kind of, talk more about the values rather than simply policy positions, and because there's a lot of there are definitely some conservative, some more right-wing artists and creators out there where it's very on the nose what they're doing, but also there, you see this all the time in the left as well. So it's sort of like, it's like I don't really care if a certain work has a certain point of view on something, but I think where it starts to get on my nerves is when it starts to like really like condescend or lecture more than sort of like kind of digging
no
deeper.
one wants propaganda.
Right.
And propaganda is unpalatable even when it's about something you care about.
Right, exactly.
It's a very different thing, and if it ever has a place, it certainly is not in the field of art.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean somebody could write about the things you said authentically still, right?
Sure.
Or you can imagine certain ways that could be done well, but it's rare, and I think we have a strong sense for when things just don't ring true,
right? When
they're about a grift, right? And with art, it feels particularly lacking in character to do that. But I don't want to overstate that, because sometimes, because it also takes courage to do that. So I don't want to overly define it, but I do think that it's just worth saying in a general way that what you tend to is the truth and reality in your heart,
right?
Your craft, and then you let what comes from you come. And the reason I think, again, for me, kind of coming out, as it were, in this time is that the main reason was actually so it wouldn't obstruct my art, and it wasn't about politics. And for the longest time, I tried to walk that line. I didn't want to be political as an artist because it's less powerful, first of all. And I just don't think that that's the primary place. Even when you talk about something political, it's not about politics. It's about the human person, and it's about reaching hearts. But I just found that I would be limited from being honest as an artist, which is the strange roundabout thing that says a lot about the time we're in. And who knew that it would be the conservative that feels stifled, right?
But do you feel that like everything now is political, and that's so like whatever song you write is going to have so the people who might agree with whatever the message is, let's just say, they're gonna say, hey, this is like a win for our side, this is a great song, like she's upholding whatever values we like, right? And then the other side is always going to pigeonhole whatever the art or media is into their narrative, because they have to sell the same clicks or subscriptions or whatever it is. I mean, we saw this, it'll be like what police violence means about climate change, right? Like they're folding it into something like that because they're a climate change activist group, right? And they're taking the current thing that's in the news and putting it into that. So have you noticed that since, like, during your artistic career, how like maybe people are using your work to fight the culture war battle?
I mean, I don't know that my work has spread enough for it to take on that kind of character yet, in a certain sense, but I guess, what do I want to say? Yeah, again, I felt like my hand was forced. I don't think it's conservatives that politicized everything.
Right.
I think that was the thing, is like, I was forced to assert who I was. I mean, then you get into the Black Lives Matter stuff, and I'm like, I'm not going to post a black square.
Right.
I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And so now, from now on, when someone looks at my Instagram, they know who I am. I may as well just be who I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess as a result of that, I think a lot of people, whether they're conservative or just not on board with this whole woke regime thing, a lot of people did the same thing. And they just said, look, there's no way I can't be political now. You have made it so I don't have a choice.
Right.
So now I'm just going to be bold about it.
Right.
And so that is where we are. And I think that's unfortunate because it's a fraying of any kind of unified, shared culture. And that's a huge tragedy. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry.
No, it does. It wasn't really. It was a tough question in the sense of like there isn't really like a right or wrong answer, an answer at all. It's just like kind of a feeling. I think what Joe was saying before and what we talk a lot about is like the right used to be the status quo. It was much more popular, and then that's why so much great art came out of the left, like in the 60s, because it was actually dangerous. There was like real countercultural messaging going on, and people were being blacklisted or fired for having not mainstream views or mainstream lifestyles. And that's why I argue that the best music in human history comes out of the US and the UK in the 1960s and 70s. That's my opinion. And I think that comes because there was actually something to fight against. But now the vast majority of the left wing, they're saying what the universities and the government and the corporations and the basically establishment is all agreeing with. Right. You have the CIA posting about Pride Month. It makes I feel like I'm in a simulation. It's insane. Yeah. And I mean, I honestly can't believe it sometimes. And so like I think that's why like what Joe was saying is, and the right wing does it too. I think a lot of times with like you saw us like post 9/11, like Toby Keith and some like overly patriotic, big truck, cold beer, going to come and kick your ass type stuff. Yeah. But I think now the vast majority of whether it's legitimate or not, whether they actually have these views or not, is like establishment, center left to progressive talking points that like, okay, everyone you're saying this to agrees with you. You're really not doing anything dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. I'm working on an album, and there are a lot of layers to it, but I'm laughing because I wasn't planning on sharing it, but it's just so relevant that I think it's.
Is this breaking news?
Breaking news.
Oh,
breaking news.
Yeah.
CRM exclusive.
There is Joe. Just for you guys, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Joni Mitchell's from my hometown.
I read that.
Yeah.
I like Joni Mitchell.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, that's another side story that is the quirk of Saskatchewan culture. All we have that is a tribute to her. All we had growing up was a mailbox with like a little painting of her. I'm not kidding. And then 3 years ago, after I got to play at the first place she ever played, they put up a plaque. So that's we don't have a stadium named
Wait, they put up a plaque 3 years ago of Joni Mitchell?
Yeah.
Wow. Speaking of those, she comes out of like the 60s and 70s, right?
Exactly.
She was like moved to California, the whole California sound thing. I like Case of You is a beautiful song.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm looping around on this project I'm working on, and I'm hoping to have a book for as well, and that I'm working on. And there's just a line in a song about that whole time, and we're still fighting the establishment, but it's got a different name, and it's sort of my thought experiment with. It's just so interesting to be the cutting edge of culture now when I'm so different than they would have thought of themselves as, and there's this coming together of things in a really interesting way. So yeah, it's not quite great breaking news for you guys, and I left out some details, but yes, I am in the studio
we'll
right now, and it has a lot of those themes. So
I'm writing a press release right now. So another thing a different topic I want to talk to you about. So you are one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter, because anyone who's on Twitter knows how much of a crazy psycho circus it can be. Like every day.
You, by the way, Kai.
But one of the reasons why I love following you so much is like you always know how to like gently cut through the noise and just be like this lovely reminder that there's like beauty and wonder in the world that should be appreciated away from screens. So you talk a lot about beauty, and so I wanted to ask you sort of, why in your view is beauty important in the arts? And I definitely agree that there's a loss of beauty, at least in a lot of mainstream places, even a lot of art galleries. So I'm curious about why you think that art, beauty is important, and why it should make a comeback.
Yeah. It's a difficult, even though it's sort of my thing, it's a difficult question to answer. And I write essays about it because I need to spend 12 hours answering it,
Right.
at a time. But in a certain sense, I guess I was kind of thinking about it today leading into this podcast. And it's like, why do you eat good food? Why do you need good food?
Right.
Beauty is so important, and only in a culture that's so wrapped up in its head, divorced from the rest of reality, can we even surmise that it doesn't matter, I think. There's such a pull to what's beautiful. So, for example, I love that this is looping back and back around to Saskatchewan, where I'm from.
Yeah.
We have some structures that I would say are incredibly ugly, and they're these new modern wonders, apparently, and I hate them. And then we've got this beautiful campus with stone archways, and obviously that was built a long time ago. But the punchline is that the same people who would say that these modern buildings that are really disordered in the way that they are built, and they're not going to be cool in 5 years, much less beautiful, those same people get their wedding pictures done on the campus, right?
Right.
And that's the continual theme. I think we watch how much people are subjected to so much that's ugly, and art was always supposed to be the realm of when you reminded people of their nobility and the reality. And I don't mean that in a thin way. Like, I want to clarify right out the gate, beauty is not just pretty.
Right.
The great painters from mid-millennium painting crucifixes is sort of the epitome, right? Or the Last Judgment. You've got these really grotesque elements to these paintings, very violent, very ugly. You've got demons pulling on people. Like, this stuff is really grotesque, and yet the whole of it is beautiful, right? So I just want to clarify, beauty is not this thin, non-innovative, sentimental concept. It's very rich when it's done properly. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to give an example I was talking about recently, if you don't mind. I think a good the term goth came up recently, and I was recently in Newport, Rhode Island, and there's a lot of old buildings there. Yeah, a lot of old buildings there, and there's a I pointed out some like Gothic architecture, and then we started talking about goths, like where that term comes from, and of course I had to mansplain it and say that, I
love mansplaining.
I just own it. I'd be like, so let me mansplain to you real quick. So, like during the Renaissance, all of the what we would call the artists now. I mean, they're artists then, but the elites, I should say, then became obsessed with the Romans and Greeks and the very symmetrical architecture of that time. So they called all of these all these cathedrals with spires and flying buttresses and real disorganized looking facades and grotesque facades. They called them Gothic as a pejorative because of the Goths that destroyed the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. To me, these are the most beautiful buildings, I think, on the planet. I've like you have traveled all over Europe, or at least all over, like a little central, not really Eastern Europe, but Western Europe, where there's beautiful Gothic cathedrals. And, these were considered very ugly at one time, very brutal, I should say. Now there's like the brutalist architecture, which I think is horrific. But So again, it's just kind of changes, and then like now these are some of the most revered buildings in the old world.
Yeah,
and they're gorgeous. Yeah,
and I think that's why I always want to be qualifying that this is the unique reality of the artist, and I'm always concerned that people will think I only mean safe and pretty when I say beautiful. And that's not what I mean. The artists need a lot of room to mess up. first of all. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's good, but it doesn't mean it's bad, because it's a lot of it's a process. Bad in the sense of useless, but maybe it is bad art, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, I think creativity is this really mysterious process that most artists can't pin down. They can't explain to you exactly what the experience of the muse is, or why the pieces fit in a certain way, or why you feel an impulse to innovate on something.
Right.
And one part of my life I'm extremely grateful for is that I grew up with an uncle who was an abstract painter. And a lot of people, modern is a bad word, and I know I used it kind of pejoratively earlier, and I try not to do that because it's not really about just that, but there is a tendency obviously in the modern age to
Sure.
But most abstract modern art is ugly, and it's not bad because it's modern, it's bad because it's ugly, I think. And I don't think ugly is good. I think, again, grotesque in the context of a broader driving towards something beautiful. Even a horror movie, I don't like horror, but I understand its purpose.
Sure.
Has some of that. This is a real tangent. I'm coming
That's
back.
fine. Go for it.
My uncle was an abstract painter, though, and his stuff is beautiful. He passed away a few years ago, but his stuff is beautiful. And he had, I often say, a love affair with color, and a deep, deep intuition for order within what he was doing. And the way he would, I wish I could show you guys a painting, but the paintings really feel like fluttering fabric. Like it's so beautiful. I can't really describe it. And I just always knew I loved it. And then I went through this process of my own kind of educational process and really diving deep into the classics and spending time in Vienna and spending time with the great works, and then hearing these critiques of the modern age and basically agreeing, understanding where they were coming from. But I always had this like little thing in my brain calling me back to my Uncle Terry. And yeah, I think he was able to accomplish that, and it was beautiful. And we don't have to be an innovative, you know, what he did was innovative. So going back to the Gothic cathedrals or whatever, I think a lot of artists will always feel outside their times and will be rejected, and they won't be understood. But that's part of what you're doing. You're speaking, you're taking the age you're in and trying to speak almost prophetically from outside of it into it.
Right.
And so, yeah, and it's hard to see it until we have the vantage point of sometimes a few hundred years, what someone was really doing and accomplishing.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
hold on, Joe, I just want to ask one question while I'm speaking to a fellow Catholic. Do you follow the, I think it's called like
I'm lapsed.
Catholicism? Yeah, you don't care. You're a bad Mexican. A Catholicism. Do you have Instagram, by the way?
I do, yeah.
Okay, it's this like Catholic Instagram page that does a lot of like funny memes, and one of the ones I love is it just fucking rips on Protestants so much, and it'll have like gorgeous Catholic cathedral from like the 12th century or 13th century in France, flying buttresses, spires, you know, a testament to God, you know, Russian Orthodox or Greek Eastern Orthodox, like onion domes, also gorgeous and beautiful, you know, symmetrical and really, you know, a work of art. And it'll be like Protestant, it'll be like Protestant church in the middle of a strip mall, like between two restaurants. But anyway, I just thought you should go look that one up because it's very funny. Like they're very good at memeing, and I feel like you'd appreciate that.
You know, a lot of Catholics are very good at memeing.
They are. It's
you know, even about that specific one, I think what's interesting about that, because I would say a lot of modern Christianity a lot of its forms is more a product of the modern age than a product of Christianity, right? And that doesn't mean, I want to be really clear, especially if there are, you know, many Protestants of goodwill listening to your podcast.
They don't.
They don't. I'll send them over. That there can be this really, really precious emphasis on the inner heart. But I think what we see in a lot, because the thing is we have plenty of our own ugly churches now too. Like Catholicism has been, I think it had its last wonderful little flourish in the mid 1950s with a lot of Catholic literature, Graham Greene and Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy and Evelyn Waugh and C.S. Lewis was like on his way. He was high Anglican, but most of our churches are basically like what you just described right now as well. We're not building much new. That's beautiful.
Well, that's another problem is that like what used to happen was why these buildings, and I know we're not going to stick on architecture this whole time, but why there's this concept that I learned about. It's literally called cathedral building, and it was these architects and artisans and craftsmen when they worked on, for instance, a cathedral. I mean, they honestly believed that they were building this for God, and that's why so many. And it's not just Catholic cathedrals, like I said, it's Russian Orthodox, it's mosques, it's synagogues, it's mandirs, it's all houses of worship where you're creating it for a higher power. Like you put a little more into it, you put a little extra into it, and it is a shame that something that's getting lost. I understand the Protestantism was against all of that, and I appreciate a lot of that too. Like, no, we just want to save souls and get rid of all this other crap that was going on with the Catholic Church. But I do think that like there's something lost throughout time that will there's something timeless about these buildings, because people would like an artisan's entire life work would focus on like one section of a cathedral in some small town in France,
and
like,
rarely see it finished, and rarely see it finished.
Exactly.
They really believed it mattered beyond their own lifetimes.
I don't think we have that anymore. I don't think we could have that anymore. I honestly don't know.
Well, the example that I wanted to bring up is, Kay, have you been to the Hammer Museum at UCLA?
No. Should I
go?
Yeah, I would. Well, it's free admission, so so even if it sucks, I went there, and so luckily they have several galleries there. So there's one gallery where they have like actual art, where it's like, they had some original like French Impressionist paintings and things there, and then they have like the student art section, which was not very good. And I don't want to like just crap all over these kids, but yeah, it's more just because so much of it is ideologically driven.
Yeah,
it'll be like a bloody tampon thrown at it, like the wall or something.
Yeah, stuff like that. And so it was a fascinating contrast though, because there's like the actual. There's the gallery that has actual original paintings from hundreds of years ago, and you see just how ornate and like you said, like even if the subject was dark or violent, at least like you saw like the attention to detail, and just there's something about trying to like dive deep into like the truth of the moment, even if it was a brutal moment. There's something there. It wasn't just a political statement. And then there was one gallery that had feminist art, and I remember one of the works was somebody took a picture from like Hustler magazine and then just blew it up, and then it had a bunch of like neon paint splattered onto it, and it was just sort of like, this is something that you can do on a weekend, and it's got a political statement, and here it is hanging up in a nice like, gallery.
Hustler is that contemporary, or is that like an old?
This was from like the early 90s, I think.
Oh, okay. Then Hustler is actually like part of the culture. I was like, Hustler, like, is that even still around?
But it was just like this, like this is my statement. It's about the male gaze, and this is how women are treated, and I'm just throw paint onto a pornographic image, and it was just sort of like, oh come on, like you like, and I'm not even necessarily against the idea of a painter expressing how women maybe the unique female experience, but it's like, can you dive deeper into what that's like? But it's just so simplistic and so surface level.
It's just like rage vomiting.
Yeah.
One of the things I realized, I'm glad I realized early on, was that there was a distinction between my own like emotional processing and what would become art that was worthy of being shared. And those are different things. I mean, there's a really strong argument for therapeutic artwork. Sure. Yeah. That doesn't mean, and there's crossover with great artists doing great work within that context too. But yeah, I think we've lost for a long time. Have you guys ever seen the documentary by Roger Scruton about why beauty matters? I think you can see it on YouTube still for free, but he does a really good job of outlining the last 100 years and how we ended up understanding art in such a bizarre way from how it was always understood prior to about 100 years ago. And just the way I would say it is that an artist has a really serious responsibility to take the obliteration of human suffering and transform it. Like that's the job, is to turn it into something that brings meaning and beauty to even the darkest of what it is to be human. And the flip side of that, which is also a huge pitfall in sort of the conservative movement, or even among people that would say they're sort of classicists, like there's some people floating around Twitter that make me roll my eyes.
Yeah.
And it's that they think that sentimentality does the trick.
Right.
They get kind of stuck in this 1800s, like really thin, sentimental is the best word for it, kind of painting that doesn't include the reality of human suffering. And that's not it either,
Right.
And but I think when all it is about just telling people, like, look how ugly everything is, look how ugly the world is, look how hopeless your life is, like who wants to tell everybody that? Why do you think that that's your mission in the world, to make everybody just only look at what's disgusting and ugly and want to die? Like, why is that what you want to bring into the world? And instead that you have agency to craft the raw material of human experience and turn it into something real,
Right. No, that's an interesting point, because you can look at old paintings depicting violent acts of, like in wartime, and you can, on the one hand, you can say, like, look how horrible war is, but you can also say, well, look how brave these men are too. And at least there's some kind of ambiguity there. There's something where it allows the audience to kind of wrestle with the meaning. But when you look at modern feminist art, it's like, okay, you know exactly what's going through their mind, you know exactly the statement they're making. There's no mystery, there's no wonder there.
Yeah, you can do it once, right?
Exactly.
One person can do it once for it to be remotely interesting, and then it's not interesting anymore.
Right, exactly.
So, how did you not burst into flames when you walked into the feminist exhibition?
Oh yeah. Well,
I'm shocked that you made it out alive.
I'm fascinated with the idea of contrasts. So like I was like, okay, like I'm going to go to like the historical section and experience this wonderful transcendent art, and then I'm going to go to the student section. And I don't know. It's worth going. At least, like I said, at least it's free, and it's in West LA, so it's at least it's a nice walkable little area there. But I recommend it, but make sure that you have the stomach for it.
I do actually. I mean, like I said, I don't watch horror, and that's not because I don't think it's valuable when done well, but because I just don't really have the stomach for it. Yeah. But in general, I think that's also a misunderstanding sometimes of people who want to create something beautiful, is that they just can't face reality or something.
Right.
And it's like, no, I think you stare it in the face, and then you learn how to defeat it.
Right.
And that, I think that's why there's also often this debate about whether people who haven't suffered profoundly can make good art. And I would say, like, I'm happy if there are some exceptions, but that route through suffering is what I think often makes people capable of facing it with a clenched jaw, but with a steel will to turn it into something valuable.
Right. So it's funny that you brought up the horror thing, because I'm a horror screenwriter, and oftentimes it's not intentional. Like I'll usually just kind of start with what I think is a fun premise, but then as I start developing more and more, I'm like, oh no, I'm diving deep into like an anxiety or a personal fear that I have, and then like I'm externalizing it in the form of some kind of malevolent supernatural entity or something. I think that another aspect of beauty is truth, and getting back to the idea that beauty isn't just something that's pretty and frilly and sentimental, and how it can be about ugly subjects, or even have a technique that is maybe done in a more brutal or rugged fashion, but it could still be beautiful. Is that I think that the artist is at least trying to dig deeper into something about the human condition, whereas again, going back to the feminist thing, is like that's such a surface, like an ideology, like that changes, and that's fleeting, and that can always change. There's something very superficial about that.
Yeah. Just agree.
Yeah.
It was interesting that you mentioned the horror thing too, because I think all of art is this exploration of the human experience, and I think a lot of people are drawn to horror because it's the one place you're still allowed to explore good and evil as real things.
Yes.
I think that's a big part of it, and especially supernatural evil.
Right.
That's like the one place you're still allowed to.
Mm.
Are you guys Flannery O'Connor fans at all?
I'm not familiar.
I read. I really like A Good Man Is Hard to Find.
Okay.
I have it on my bookshelf. I've read that. I mean, that's a bunch of short stories, but that one in particular, which is also the anthology title, is my favorite. What about her?
So, I mean, this is what's interesting is I really am fascinated by her as a person, and I have friends that really love her stuff, and I've read some of hers, and I've had a reasonably helpful experience reading her. But I find her, again, I just don't have much of a threshold for what's ugly. Like, it's hard. It's just too hard on me. I think different things for different people. And one of the things she said was something to the effect of, just because you're called to do something to work out your salvation doesn't mean it's the other person's wow, I butchered it. No, it's but her point was that just because I need to write it doesn't mean you have to read it. Right. But the reason I bring her up is that she used shock and violence to accomplish this engagement, this undeniable facing, I think, of good, evil, grace, mystery, and just sort of the reality that all of life is charged with this undeniable, mysterious force that we have to reckon with.
Her work, I mean, The Good Man Is Hard to Find. If I read it probably last year, maybe 2 years ago. It's very dark.
It is. All of that's incredibly dark.
Yeah, I can't remember too many specifics from other short stories, but that one, it's almost like a gut punch dark. I remember where it's just senseless violence that seems like there's no purpose to it or redemption. It's almost like, okay, the violent act happened, now let's have some justice, but instead of that, the story just ends. I honestly can't speak too much more about it besides that, but I know she was a Catholic in the Deep South, which is rare, especially for back then. But yeah, I do. She does have a way with storytelling that I don't know. You didn't find her to be. I guess it's all interpretation. You don't find her to be nihilistic.
No, because I know what's driving underneath it, and she had a firm belief in grace and God. And interestingly, I think she just realized for her that what modern man needed was a shock to the system to wake up. I actually wrote a song about her.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
But I'm hoping to share. We want to make a video. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but no, I think what happened was I read Parker's Back in undergrad, and I finished it just like you described. I finished it, and I said, "You can't leave me there. How dare you do that to me? How dare you do that to me? This is horrible." And then I reread it, and I could see what she did. And yeah, she had a passion for facilitating encounter with good and evil and those questions, and leaving people with those questions, because I think she had a deep conviction that modern man needed that. And she's a really interesting person to debate, because there are a lot of people, I think, who, from what we're talking about with beauty and everything, who would say exactly that, like, that's not what the purpose of the artist is, and that's a big question mark, and that's why she's a good example. And yet her work persists, and at a time when Catholicism was quickly going out of vogue, and until that point even had carried a certain amount of weight even in American literature and culture, film industry, it was quickly going out of fashion, and she managed to write something that ended up captivating the hearts of many, many secular university students, and got them re-engaged with, if not spiritual questions, deep questions of meaning. And that was her,
While we're on, have you ever read or seen the movie Silence?
I haven't, and I want to, for the reason of being able to discuss it, but I always think, oh my God,
you definitely should. I know I've talked about it before on the show with Joe. It's about Jesuit priests from
Yeah.
Portugal who go to Japan, where there's a burgeoning Catholic population, but the shogun or the local daimyo, or I can't remember exactly what he is persecuting them. And there's a priest there who has allegedly apostatized. I can never say that word right. So these two priests go from Portugal to Nagasaki to see if this is true, right? Because this is a huge deal. This is like the 16th century.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lessons that comes out, one of, I think, the most beautiful parts of Catholicism is shown in this. And of course, the title from the book and movie comes from, Rodriguez, the protagonist. He believes God is silent. He can't hear God, right? He's a priest and he can't hear God. And he keeps asking throughout his life, are you silent? And I know I don't want to ruin the movie or the book, but I've gotten this far. So basically, God says, I was never silent. I suffered beside you. And I do think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of Christianity. I don't know too many other faiths that well, but to me, that's one of the most beautiful parts of it. That God hasn't promised us a life without suffering, but He has promised that we never suffer alone. And I think that a lot of beautiful art comes out of that. Secondly, I know they're not Catholic, but Russian Orthodox is Dostoevsky, and from Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, exactly.
One of, I think, the most beautiful passages I've ever read comes from Zosimov, who not to quote the whole thing, but he says, like, there is no sin greater than the love of God. Like, God will always forgive the truly repentant. And I think those two pillars of Christianity are what makes it such a beautiful religion. I think it can be weaponized. I think it has been weaponized a lot, just like any religion, just like any ideology or any movement. But I do think that if we focus on those two things, it can grow and really thrive. I know, Joe, we kind of got on a religious tangent here. Joe gets going like geopolitical, but
hey, we no drone strikes though. No drone strikes.
Yeah, I haven't gone off about drone strikes recently, but they're coming. Anyway, I don't know. I feel like that's so. If I could recommend, I recommend those two books, Silence and.
Yeah, I'm a big Dostoevsky fan, and the Russians in general.
I did read that on your page too. Yeah, and I figured that you'd read him then.
And I think that's the thing about it. Actually, it goes back to the meme a little bit. Is this conviction? Both the Catholic and the Orthodox way of relating to the world has this, what we call, a sense of the sacramentality of matter. So, as a Catholic, you've got your sacraments, right? Mm-hmm. You've got communion and confession and marriage and baptism. But there's a smaller sort of form of that, I guess, referring to just the fact that everything material has deep meaning, which is why we do the incense and why we have the candles. Hey guys, I did my candle for you today, just for you.
Thank you.
Oh, hey.
By the way,
thank you.
A nice little feminine frill for you. But there is something in the modern age that's so common where we deny the need for the physicality to inform our way of relating. And in a lot of this literature, it's why you find such a rich palette, I guess, for artists when they are deeply imbued with these traditional Christian faiths. There's so much material to draw from to make beautiful art because everything is charged with meaning. I mean, that's the Hopkins line, right? The world is charged with the grandeur of God. Like every little blade of grass is buzzing with something worth noting. And I think in a lot of kind of modern Protestantism, but just generally, and a lot of Catholics have kind of absorbed this too, right? It's not like it's lacking, but just this separation of body and soul in a very strange way that ends up losing a lot of the richness of human life. Sorry if that's way off and if this is a complete
no. I think I see what you're saying, and even today I was listening. I don't know if you listen to Dave Smith, libertarian comedian and podcast host. Is a great show. And Joe and I have talked about this during what we dubbed the Great Awakening of 2020. And that as much as like quote unquote atheism grows or irreligious or whatever it is, like religion will never die. It could just change. And it just turns into worshiping celebrities or and different ideologies. The examples I like to bring up, you just brought up candle, right? Well, what if people were lighting Dr. Fauci candles or Ruth Bader Ginsburg candles or whatever it is? Like that's just the next religion. And for these people who are quote unquote like who sneer at religious people, who think that liberalism and democracy and all this stuff, like that's just their new church and God. Like it never, when Nietzsche said God is dead, he didn't say that as a proclamation. He didn't say that as a good thing. Nietzsche said that as like, well, something else is going to take its place. I forget who said it, but like there's a God, a God-shaped hole in all of our hearts, like in the human heart. It's just what do you fill that with? And I think that, and the other example is my favorite example that could not be more fucking on the nose, excuse me, is I remember watching during the, summer of 2020, protesters, if that's what you want to call them, literally carrying down the street on their shoulders on a platform or on a board, a huge raised fist. That's just an icon of the next ideology that you have to submit to. Like, and there's that famous picture, I think it was in DC, of the woman sitting there who actually supported Black Lives Matter, but she's like, no, I'm not going to raise my fist. And they're all like leaned over at her and raising the fist and screaming at her. Like, how is that not just 15th century Europe? Like that's exactly what it is, or the Middle East or whatever. It's happened all over the world.
Like the ritualization of politics, hey?
Yes, exactly. The ritualization of it, the worshiping of it, celebrity and politicians and all of that. So I don't know. It's a constant push and pull. My whole thing, I just get very annoyed with people who think like, well, like we're above religion. It's like, no, you're just creating a different one that actually doesn't have any true value. That is just malleable and doesn't, isn't going to give you what a actual religion, or I don't know if that's even the right term, will provide. And I do think that there's a deterioration there.
Yeah, and I think people are hungry for meaning. And I think the main reason I guess we've come back to that probably a lot more than we at all planned to, and I didn't really mean to lead with it. But what I will say just from an artistic perspective is I just feel like it's not fair that I get such a rich batch of symbology to draw from, like I have it's just so rich for me to be able to just draw from all of this. Yeah, these things that just really add to the strength of my work. And I think that's what many artists over the course of millennia found, right? So it's just from an artistic standpoint, there's a real question of what are we losing, right? And also, why are we? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, I was going to, that's a perfect segue to a question I wanted to ask is why, and I'm talking more from the arts standpoint here, but why does the past matter and why should we preserve it?
Yeah, I think the main reason why the past matters is because we are not randomly floating atoms that have no context. The first and foremost, to just, at least from a neutral statement about whatever you think of the past, to understand yourself in any kind of way, you have to situate yourself within the broad human conversation. Like there's just no other way to function. And I think we see the effects of that rootlessness now so much, right? So that's maybe the first thing. And then secondly, I think to come back to just this idea of not just something's not bad because it's modern. That's not really the reason. It's that, and things aren't good because they're old. I think that's what a lot of people think is that, oh, you just like things better because they're old or because they're classic or they have a classical form. And the answer is no. I like these things because they managed to stick around until now. And you're dealing with the best architecture, the best writers, the best scientists, the best philosophers, the best thinkers, the best gifted human beings. Maybe not. I mean, there's a lot to say about who we didn't get to have pass along, but the fact remains that if it's persisted this long, it's probably worth giving a bit of an ear to. And
Well, that's what's
yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, and that's what's so gross about what's happened. I think there has been pushback finally, but what happened during the Great Awakening was the attempted and sometimes successful erasure of artists, of historical figures, of renaming buildings and canceling books. I mean, Flannery O'Connor, we were just talking about her. She was canceled, and you know, Abraham Lincoln getting his schools renamed and there's
an article
statue removed.
There's an article that came out a few years ago. So Mozart's my favorite composer, and so there's an article that came out about how Mozart was a symbol of the white patriarchy, and I'm just like, oh, come on, fuck you. You probably didn't listen to a single goddamn. Sorry for the profanity, but
No,
you
sometimes
probably,
I wish I could. Sometimes I wish I could.
but it's just kind of like, oh,
We'll say it
know,
for you.
It's like, you know nothing about Mozart. There's nothing that connects his, any single note that he's ever produced to neo-Nazis. Like, it's so stupid.
Well, it also doesn't, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter. Like, I wrote a whole thing last Columbus Day about like the liberal argument for Columbus Day, and how, like, I believe Christopher Columbus was a bastard. I actually believe he was a bastard even for his time. I don't think he was a good guy. I think he did a lot of really horrible things. However, what Columbus meant to certain people, like my people, Italian Americans, was very like social justice-y. It was a symbol of we belong here too. Back when Italian Americans were very much persecuted, and people rallied around him, and the renaming of squares and streets and even cities, like, that meant something to people. That meant like inclusion. That meant we belong. Like I said, we belong here too, and that should be enough. Like, we can still talk about Columbus as a historical figure, how he was a bastard, and also the incredible things that he achieved. Neil deGrasse Tyson himself said Christopher Columbus was one of the single most important figures in human history, because what he did was reconnect two worlds, the old world and the new world. And he reconnected that, and the world has never been the same. And we can appreciate that, just like we can appreciate a writer who maybe used the N-word back in the 40s, or a musician who, I mean, I don't even know how you could cancel Mozart, but like it doesn't matter. Like, that's one of the dumbest ones. Like, you should be able to look past these personal things, or even people like Lovecraft, and still enjoy the worlds that he created and how he put an indelible mark on literature and on the horror / sci-fi genre, and still appreciate that instead of just ripping everything down. Yeah.
To bring it back to the political, I think that the thing is, we have a temptation of, I mean, everything you're saying has a lot of validity. I think we have a temptation to say, we have a temptation to like take them at their face, take it all at face value and say it's really about what these people did, when it somebody once said, and this was years ago, they said, you have to understand, you're not going to understand a single thing about what's going on if you don't understand this. Everything is for the sake of the revolution. And the reality is that they don't care whether Columbus was good or not. It literally doesn't matter.
Right.
Is it something they can use to destroy, to disconnect people from a historical context so they're easy to control? That's the whole story.
Right.
So
was this person a Marxist, a self-avowed Marxist?
No, this is somebody who understands Marxists.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
Marxists probably aren't going to tell you that.
Right.
But that is what's going on, because you have to separate people from any sense of historical context so that they are just floating atoms with no meaning, because then they will bond themselves to a controlling government. That's the whole story. And it has nothing to do with whether or not Columbus was a good guy or not. I mean, if we really wanted to have that conversation, we could have that conversation, but that's not what the conversation actually is. It's just about destruction.
Yeah, my whole argument and my argument at the end of it was like, just create more, like put up more statues of other people, write more novels, let more people's voices be heard. Don't tear down. Like, you can have, like, there's always room for more. And that was really the, like, I don't know.
And I do agree. I think what one thing Jordan Peterson said, and I like Jordan. I mean, I
like him a lot.
Yeah. He talked about how just that lack of historical context leads to an immense lack of gratitude, which is a lot of how we get where we are too. Just this absolute cluelessness about the default experience of humanity throughout time, which is really hard. But that's the punchline. It's always been really hard, and it's phenomenally rare that you can go to the grocery store and get whatever you want. Like
Right.
that is almost psychotic in its how rare it is.
I think sorry, Joe, I want to drop one more quote on you. I think what you're saying is that, and it's not what I'm going to say isn't new, and I'm taking this from many other people, but it's like life has gotten so good for so many people. It doesn't mean right now like actually sucks, like relatively. I think a lot of people are struggling, but in general, throughout human history, life is so good that everyone always has to find a way to be a victim, or a certain portion of the population does. And I forget who said it, but someone, some literary figure said like human beings have a longing for suffering. Like there's like we have a penchant for suffering, and we always want to find. And it's unfortunate. I do think this is a flaw in humanity. I try and fight back against it myself. It's like, well, if we just get that job promotion, we get that car, we get that partner, we get that house, whatever it is, like life will be good. And it is never enough. And that is unfortunate. I do think this is something that we as humanity, at least in the first world, have to struggle with. I'm going to find out who said that. I can't remember exactly.
Well, I was going to bring up about my personal frustrations with this attack on the artists of the past, is that there's still so much to learn from. I mean, so I dabble a little bit in composition, and my music does not sound classical, but I can look at a Bach fugue and be like, oh, I really like the shape of that melody. Yeah, that's interesting. Or I really like that harmonic rhythm. I'm glad that I can pull up Bach's music, from his thousands of hours of music and sheet music that's available, and still find inspiration there. And I think that, Ben and I, we talk a lot about, sort of dangerous artists and breaking rules and taking risks. And there's a part of me that loves that aspect of just sort of, fuck tradition. But at the same time, I think it's important to at least understand the past and tradition before, because like if you're just breaking rules without learning them, then you're just, it's like a 15-year-old or even younger, like a child who's learning to swear for the first time. And it's just like, okay, but you're not doing it in an artful way. You're just doing it just to be provocative. There's nothing interesting there. But so I'm all for breaking rules and taking risks and everything, but at the same time, it's like at least put in the work, the discipline to understand the rules that you're breaking. I think that's where a lot of innovation can come from. But so many of these woke activists aren't even doing that. This author is straight, white, and male. Therefore, we need to get rid of them, take them out of the curriculum. It's like, can you at least put in the work to say like, yeah, this author, their work isn't as valuable today, and here's why. It's okay. At least show me the work. I'm up for that kind of debate, but we're not seeing that. It's identity based.
And it's the same thing, right? It's like you understand, like, oh, it had nothing to do with any of that. It's just about destroying like European culture because it's dominant, and that's what we have to crack to control.
Well, that's why I basically boycotted. I used to be a regular like GQ reader back a while ago. I basically boycotted them after they came out with some bullshit list that was like, read this instead of this, and it was basically every single thing that they were saying not to read was like basically like a white guy, maybe a straight white guy. And everything they were saying to read was not right. And one of them, for instance, was like the Bible. And it was like, but to read this instead, it was like, I'm pretty sure people are reading the Bible for a different reason than reading this novel that you're suggesting. but all they had to do, all they had to do to make it a good list was say, if you like this, try this too. Like, you see, that's all they do is make that little change that would have went from something that's like a joke, in my opinion, to something that's like, oh, okay, well, I did enjoy Vonnegut. That got the most because they canceled Vonnegut. They're like, don't read Vonnegut. Are you fucking kidding me? But and read this instead. It should have been like, you like Vonnegut? Well, try this person who happens to be, a trans-indigenous, non-binary two-spirit or something. Right?
So it's like don't read the Bible, read Ibrahim Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist.
Yes, I mean they're right on the same level of importance in our.
There was. I wish I could remember who it was now, but I think I read an article a few years ago where the title was "In Praise of the Straight White Male," and and I can't remember the content of it except that it was basically like, look, I have benefited from so many good men, and they happen to fit that description.
Right.
And it's horrible how much they've just been dragged through the mud. And it's true. Like most of my professors who have made, and not all, but most of my professors who have made me a reasonably empathetic, stable person who likes people of all different stripes and is friends with people of all different stripes and colors and modalities, you know,
Sure.
who helped me see the world in a way that made sense and that was good, and that has led me to be able to be the person able to be, like, happened to be straight white males. And would I have cared if they were Black males? No. Like,
Right.
it's just such a strange, anyway. So it was a funny article, and I wish I could remember who wrote it.
Right. But yeah, so Ben, should we start to close out?
Yeah, Kay, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you, or did you enjoy your time on TRM? Would you come back?
I was just gonna say, but I was like, I shouldn't say that. But I was gonna say, I just want to keep talking.
I know. Yeah, this is great.
No, it's good.
But yeah, we'd love to have you back on, and feel free. We always tell this to our guests, like, whenever you have like an album coming out or a project you're about to announce, invite yourself on the show. Just be like, hey guys, I got something coming out next month. Can I come on the show to talk about it? It's like, we would love to have you back on.
Yeah, we love having repeat guests. We don't have a lot of friends, so.
No, you guys are a lot of fun to talk to. And
one thing real quick, I want to say, Joe, I was just thinking about this. Have we ever had a guest who either is not an Angelino or Angelino adjacent, like Judson, who's like lived in Los Angeles, or Canadian?
Well, the feminist lady,
that's
Morgan.
Right. Yeah,
Ashley
that's
Morgan.
right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. She's Welsh. All right, never mind. Well, most of our guests are either in Los Angeles or Canada. Or from Canada. I was just thinking about that, but you're right. Yeah, that was our first guest. All right, never mind. Thesis quashed.
So Kate,
go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say. So if you could let our audience know where they can find you.
For sure. Yeah. So Twitter's a good little home base. It's K Clarity, Kay. It's right there. K Clarity. My new main home base is Substack, and I share a lot of stuff there. I do a lot of different personal artistic projects. I work with a lot of private clients, and I also what we're working on our end is networking a bunch of the greatest artists who want to build something better than what we've seen so far. So so if people want to follow on Substack or find me on the website, it's kclarity.art. Any of those places will sort of lead you to what's coming out soon. And I do have some albums in the queue and a lot of artistic stuff coming. So I would love to just have people along. If you want to hear me meander in written form, especially, that's a good place to find me.
Very cool.
All right. Thank you so much, Kay. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Awesome.
And Kay, stay reckless, Kay.
You stay reckless, Joe.
Okay, I'll do it too. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, guys.
Like the crits.